Hey guys, how are y'all doing today? This is D. Durrell with D. Durrell Life Solutions. Glad to be here once again to have a conversation with you all today. It's been a while since I've been on the channel. As you know, for many of you, I have been focusing a lot on my dating channel. Check out Coach D. Durrell Spears, which will bring you a lot of entertaining and applicable, effective dating coach advice, strategies, game plan in order to improve in that area. Right now I am chilling at my private practice and I decided to talk about Jeffrey Dahmer. I do understand that it has been a very, very popular topic to discuss right now. I see it all over YouTube, social media. Check out the Netflix series. Now, I just want you all to understand the video that I'm going in this video that I'm going to talk about today. The information that I'm going to give is relative to my training in studying the psychopathology of Jeffrey Dahmer. I'm not going to talk about the fictitious movie in itself, even though it was based on things that really happened, historical events. I know that in videos and different documentaries and movies, they don't always tell the whole story. So I'm going to come from a professional perspective. I'm going to come today and give my perspective in studying the psychopathology or the mental health of Jeffrey Dahmer. And I'm going to come from that perspective that's maybe somewhat different than what you're hearing from others and different things relative to the movie. So I'm not going to talk in reference to the movie itself. I'm going to talk about things that I studied myself, things that I read in documents, things related to his forensic profile, things that are relative to his mental health. So before I get started with that, I want to preface that Jeffrey Dahmer was deemed before trial or during trial as being incompetent, and he was mentally ill. And therefore, being incompetent meaning that he was not fully aware of what was going on, the proceedings, the effect, everything around him, his functional level, his orientation to reality, which he had certain mental illness that definitely disrupted his capacity to understand what was going on, the outcome, the results of his behavior, of the things that he engaged in. So, I want to lament the fact that usually when we're dealing with people who have or suffer from psychopathology, in most instances, the telltale signs gradually develop from childhood to grade school, middle school, high school, and then early adulthood. They get more severe, more intense, and the severity of the actions, because of their confidence level to engage in these behaviors, gradually increases over time. As a kid, Jeffrey Dahmer had issues with socialization. He grew up in a household where his mother also suffered from mental illness. So in many cases, there's a large percentage of people who have mental illness who may have had a parent or another family member that had either the same mental illness or another type of mental illness. Jeffrey Dahmer's mother suffered from severe depression. Let me repeat, she suffered from severe depression. It hindered her ability to function as a mother and as a wife. And eventually, Jeffrey's parents divorced. Jeffrey was somewhat affected by that. Now, in that process of that occurring, Jeffrey Dahmer was able to somewhat socialize in the school setting and have some level of friends. However, during that time, Jeffrey Dahmer became fascinated with dead animals, which is atypical for any child to be fascinated with dead organisms. Now, most kids like to see animals living, playing, want to play with them, want to draw them, color them, want to touch them. Jeffrey was fascinated with dead animals. Also, that gradually progressed with Jeffrey wanting to dissect these animals, whether it was their legs, their arms, different aspects of their body. Jeffrey thought that it was very interesting and it was very stimulating to him to dissect animals. And he gradually engaged in those behaviors, in which he had dissected a dog, he dissected several different types of animals, and learned the process in ways in order to do so. During this time, Jeffrey also had a younger brother, which I don't know a whole lot about. And as far as their socialization and interaction, but Jeffrey, although he became a class clown, became funny, and he did a lot of different things, he did well in school, and then at some point towards his high school years, he began to drink. Jeffrey Dahmer was an alcoholic. Jeffrey Dahmer began abusing alcohol around 14 years of age. Also during that time, Jeffrey Dahmer began to fantasize about men. And I think at this point he was coming into his own, into identifying that he had same-sex preferences, and that the fact that when he would think about or fantasize about having sex or being with a man, it was usually in the position of control. It was usually in the position of domination, just as he did with the animals. Okay? With those animals, he still had a fascination of just dissecting these animals, being in total control of another person's remains. Psychologically, this transition into Jeffrey wanting to dissect human beings, particularly those that he was fascinated with having sex with, which was basically men. Okay? Jeffrey Dahmer did suffer from some issues of isolation and being seen a certain way, although he was sort of a class clown, and he tried to, I think he engaged in those behaviors to hide the fact or to repress the fact that he had internal issues, being a person who would be classified as homosexual, and the fact that he wanted to dissect bodies and he was fascinated with the decapitation of animals and human beings, and preserving body parts and bones. These are the things that Jeffrey was fascinated with. These are the things that Jeffrey would educate himself on. These are the things that Jeffrey wished that he could carry out. Towards the end of his high school career, Jeffrey Dahmer was fascinated with an adult male who would always jog, in which he began to connect his sexual fantasies with control, decapitating a body, and using violent means to kill somebody so that he could dissect their bodies. And so he made an attempt. He was fascinated with hiding and looking at a certain guy jog, in which he wanted to kill and to take over his body. Jeffrey Dahmer, as an adult, after making the age of 18, continued to drink heavily, and he killed a person, a guy, about 3 weeks or less than a month after graduating from high school. Jeffrey Dahmer continued to engage in, I would say, atypical behavior for kids. After graduating, he would stand out the school in the parking lot looking and staring at people and drinking. Jeffrey Dahmer also, as an adult, exposed himself in a public place around 20 or more people, physically around women and children, and he was just given a $50 fine. Now, we all know in today's world, and I'm glad of that, Jeffrey Dahmer would have initially probably went to jail and would have been labeled a sex offender. Jeffrey Dahmer got off with a $50 fine for that level of behavior. As Jeffrey became older, he had I want to say around an 7 to 8 year, I want to say a 7 to 8 year range of not hurting anyone. He went to the military, okay? He went to Ohio State University, didn't do that well. He decided to go to the Army. He went to the Army, stationed in Germany. He continued to have the fantasies. He continued to engage in very risky sexual behavior. Jeffrey continued to engage in having casual sex with men, meeting in gay bars, bathhouses. He also solicited for sex. He also turned down a few times situations where he was, propositioned. But in all situations, Jeffrey prided himself on wanting to control someone, wanting to be the assertive person in the whatever act that was going on. Jeffrey continued, and I'm going to stress, he continued to think about sexually dominating men, certain body parts, particularly their chest, their upper body area, and other areas. And he wanted to dissect those body parts and preserve them. Continue to want to preserve body parts, preserve bones and skeletons. After about 7 to 8 years, Jeffrey began to go on a cycle of killing again, sporadically. But what I will say, Jeffrey engaged in lewd acts throughout his adult life. Some of those acts he was arrested for, and then some things were just overlooked. That were telltale signs. And when we address the psychopathology of someone, that it's usually the same cycle of getting away with certain behaviors or certain behaviors being overlooked, or the fact that you're getting arrested and you're getting a slap on the wrist. The same thing happened with Charles Manson and other guys that did different things. These guys consistently did things that were overlooked until the obvious came about. Now, I want to preface, as Jeffrey became more and more mentally ill, he was diagnosed with 3 very severe mental illness. Now, I cannot clarify when he was diagnosed with these mental illnesses. I'm not sure that he was diagnosed with the mental illnesses that I'm going to talk about at the same time, because it's very rare to be diagnosed with 2 personality disorders, particularly if they're of a different cluster. Jeffrey Dahmer was initially diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Then he was diagnosed with schizotypal disorder. And lastly, he was diagnosed when he was in full range of his mental illness with psychotic disorder, or in many situations, most probably schizophrenia. Okay? Now, borderline personality disorder. Is a cluster B disorder that is characterized by inability to maintain relationships, over emotion in response to things, self-defeating behaviors, doing things, a lot of maladaptive responses in regards to your relationship with other people, which actually cause those relationships to not last. This is what Jeffrey engaged in. Jeffrey Dahmer was very inconsistent when dealing with people, and notice, through all of his actions, he never formed long-term relationships with any of these people. He just wanted to have sex with them. This was all indicative of the symptomology of borderline personality disorder, because in most situations, borderline personality disorder, individuals who have this illness, it will engage in sexual behaviors, or I would say casual relationships that will be absent of you bonding, loving, caring, empathizing with others. Second thing, when we're talking about the second diagnosis of schizotypal behavior or schizotypal personality disorder, this is a cluster A personality disorder, which focuses on the fact that Jeffrey was isolating himself. Jeffrey had eccentric behavior. Jeffrey had strange and odd behaviors and strange responses in social situations. Jeffrey Dahmer had some levels of paranoia towards others. Jeffrey Dahmer was very calculating in choosing his prey or his victims. Jeffrey Dahmer, typically, when interacting with men, was more about meeting them in places where it involved alcohol, partying, having conversation, and how could I bring you to my place so that I can be sexual with you and then go about carrying on murderous acts. This is what Jeffrey engaged in. It was nothing about, or I would say it was absent of taking someone to a dinner, engaging and doing activities together, enjoying each other's time, learning about someone, developing emotions, developing love for a person, regardless if it's a heterosexual or homosexual relationship. His interaction with human beings was quite limited because of his eccentric behavior, because he was constantly looking at or assessing them from a position of how he thought they viewed him, which was basically he was projecting. He was projecting that people were looking at him based on his acts and things that he knowingly did. He judged people on in response to them thinking of him as such. So when Jeffrey interacted with people, he thought that they probably looked down upon him for the acts and the evil things that he did. Also, the fact that it appeared that Jeffrey was not openly homosexual, even though he did things out in public. Jeffrey was more of a guy who preyed upon people he wanted to have sex with and kill. And his satisfaction did not fully come from having sex. His satisfaction was the fact that I could dominate you. He put things in people's drinks. He sedated people. I wanted to dominate you so you could be unconscious or subconscious as I did the things that I did. And then I would kill you, and then I would preserve your body. Jeffrey was trained as a medic in the Army when he was in the Army. So Jeffrey was highly skilled at doing the things that he was doing in the manner that he preserved all of these bodies and things of that sort. Now, also, Jeffrey was diagnosed with psychotic disorder, which means that Jeffrey was out of touch with reality. Jeffrey was hallucinating. Jeffrey probably had auditory and visual hallucinations, delusions, obviously, thoughts of grandeur, things of that sort. Jeffrey Dahmer was not orientated to life itself, time, place, whereabouts, disorganized thought patterns, probably magical behavior. Classic case, I would say, of meeting all features. And so my information, now if I would have been privy to Jeffrey's full mental health history, it would give more of a analysis as far as why he was diagnosed with these illnesses. From a professional standpoint, I don't think that Jeffrey was diagnosed with bipolar Jeffrey was not diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and schizotypal disorder at the same time. That's very, very rare. I'm not saying it. I've never seen a person diagnosed with two personality disorders. Although there are situations in which a person clearly may have a lot of features of multiple personality disorders, and then they may give them a diagnosis of unspecified personality disorder, and I think something like NOS per se, not otherwise specified. I've seen situations in which people may have that. I do think that he may have had these illnesses and been diagnosed at later times, particularly with the psychotic disorder that may have came about later in his development through his psychopathology, because there's a lot of aspects of differential diagnoses when we are relating borderline personality disorder, schizotypal behavior, particularly schizotypal and psychotic disorders, because they're highly similar. So that is my overall analysis. Eventually, guys, Jeffrey was found. He preyed upon young African American men. Early on, he actually was I think his first two guys were white. But then later on, as he went on a slew of killings, they were all African American. The latter years were all young African American males. Okay, so Jeffrey was a danger to the African American community. Also, Jeffrey got away with a lot, and it was overlooked mainly because he targeted the African American community. I wholeheartedly think if Jeffrey would have targeted white men at the rate that he targeted African American men, I don't think he would have gotten away with his behaviors for the time that he did. I'm talking about ranging from 1978 to 1991. Okay, so we're looking at about 13 years. So I want to thank you for your time. This is D. Durrell with D. Durrell Life Solutions. Have a great day.